town's local music scene is unique. It's something that can exist across several decades and is ever-changing in the community.
Within these communities, cornerstones emerge as locales of the scene. Whether they be music stores, venues, or studios, these locations stand out as hubs of musical appreciation. And while many places around the world have their own music scenes, Western New York's is one to focus on.
I'm Alex Irwin.
And I'm Chloe Kowalik. And today, we're going to take an in-depth look at the Western New York music scene, both before the COVID-19 pandemic and after.
We've interviewed a few local record stores, local bands, and those who are involved in the music scene.
But let's take it back to Western New York and a popular hub for music, Revolver Records. Owned by Phil McNamara, the first store opened in 2015 in Buffalo, New York.
Buffalo itself has a rich music scene, with several venues and bands keeping the city alive. But at the heart, Revolver Records has been a place for local artists to display their music and get it out to community members.
I'll take in any local artist stuff, and I've posted about it. And we usually sell it on consignment, just because I don't know that it's going to sell, or we have bought an amount of it as well. It depends on who it is. If somebody I know who regularly sells records. One of my employees put out a single this year. It's great. And I love it. I love having local stuff, and most of these people are friends of mine, and I think that's awesome. I mean, how cool is it to go into a record shop and have your own record in there, for sale?
Before the pandemic, McNamara said the record business was going well.
I mean, I thought business was going very well, and I had just opened up my second location on Elmwood Avenue, and I don't even think it had been a year when COVID hit. But it was fine. Like, I remember, I worked a lot more back then, but business was where I thought it should be. And it was great. And so if that's, it definitely changed during COVID and a lot after COVID, because what I thought was doing okay was probably doing meh, you know what I mean?
But then the pandemic hit in 2020. McNamara was determined to keep Revolver Records afloat and move the business online.
I shipped records. I delivered records. I had this thing within 5 mile radius of the shop. I deliver your order for free. And so but I was really good about posting multiple times a week on social media, because everybody is at home and everybody's on their phone, and thousands of people see the stories that you post and the pictures, and you know what I mean? And so I wanted people to know that I'm working my ass off to get people what they wanted.
McNamara's main motivation to keep things moving during the pandemic was his customers.
But yeah, and so I just wanted to get by, and I did that because I knew that I had a good feeling that it would pay off, because I watched it in other businesses, and I said, if I want to go to this restaurant when they open because they brought a bag and put it in my trunk, and I was so happy to eat that food when I couldn't go out to eat, I want to go there when they open. If they see me at their door and I put the record, on the step and then walk away, and then I can talk to that customer who I used to spend hours with in the shop and just tell them that I care about them and how are you doing, and you know what I mean? And I knew that people would care about that.
Now, the business continues to be a central part of the local music scene. McNamara has just opened his 4th location of Revolver Records in East Aurora. He hopes his business will continue to grow, and in turn, he'll further his support of local artists.
One of the interesting properties of music, and in turn the music scene, is that unique alcoves can form. Each of these has its own twists and flares to it, with important members and places unique to just that alcove. Within Western New York, Fredonia stands out.
Another record store stands as a hub for musical appreciation in Fredonia, Rhythm and Grooves. Owned by Derek Jusko, the store opened in 2018. When the pandemic started, Jusko's store stood as a place to buy and appreciate music when almost all concerts were halted.
People started to find out that they needed to sort of accentuate their hobbies, or they needed to maybe double down on something that they started. And it just so happened that to slow the spread, as they said, records were a very healthy option to go for. A very nice at-home listening experience. You didn't have to come in contact with anybody if you wanted to. And I was even doing at that time remote deliveries. So, I could have delivered to your house if you wanted me to, basically.
What makes Fredonia scene especially unique is its tendency to both fiercely support local bands and welcome in touring artists. Whether these bands have a small fan base or are nationally recognized, Fredonia shows support. Jusko saw this firsthand with a band called Planet Mercury.
I think it's huge. And for the record, they loved it here. I mean, and I don't mean just the store. I mean, they loved Fredonia.
Yeah.
You know, they loved the crowd that they got to experience at BJ's. You know, they loved the scene that was around, and they loved the enthusiasm. So I think when you get a band like them, and they're from Boston, I think Cambridge area in Massachusetts, and they see that, and they can, and a band that hasn't really been around for too long. They've only been at it for, I think, a couple of years, if that. So when you can give that band, that college age band, that experience outside of where they're from, and they can take that on the road, and what they can experience in their hometown, they can also get that here, except maybe the expectations aren't as high. So when it actually happens, it's like, whoa, this is amazing here, that we're actually reaching this audience in this small town where most people would just drive past and not think twice about.
This puts Fredonia in the special position to have bands from outside the Western New York region play in this small town. The town has a positive reputation when it comes to bands outside this alcove, and that news spreads around. Jesco believes that this could lead to more and more touring performances from newer artists.
For now, but also for the future. So if and when those bands take that next step, maybe they're touring the coast or maybe they're touring the whole country, they can talk to somebody else who's a younger band and another band is asking them for advice. Where's a good place to start? You know, how can I get my feet wet? We'll go to Fredonia because they'll support you there. It's a great scene, and it's a great burgeoning scene to grow your sound, to grow your camaraderie as a band, but also on a personal level to know what you want to do going forward.
I've never been good at remembering names, attaching a fictitious word to a face. I can't say
Fredonia's local music scene is, just like Jesco said, unique. It's a scene that's evolved heavily over the past few years. Chloe and I spoke to Hallie Cook, a fifth-year student at SUNY Fredonia, who has been a part of the scene both before and after the pandemic.
According to Cook, Fredonia's scene has gone through their fair share of venues.
So Creek House hasn't had anything in a long time, so I'm going to say
Yeah.
that that's not happening yet. Hope for it, though, because I think there's a band in there that would do it.
Mhm.
It was originally run by, like, a music frat, and that's why they did it.
Oh.
And so it's a little more organized when you have, like, 10 guys,
Yeah,
not
yeah.
4. So, and then I feel like 37's gone, but I think 37 was what tried to maintain that old Fred sound.
Mhm.
And so when they shut down, I was like, oh, old Fred's dead. Like, this is gone. And it's, like, not a bad thing. Yeah, and then, Lighthouse, I don't even think anyone lives there anymore. Like, it's falling apart. So, yeah, that kind of is done. And, yeah, the corner place is done. But also, it's, like, low enrollment. That's because there's half the amount of people that go here now. That's also because of COVID. So, of course, less people, less venues, and less bands.
Today, the scene is mostly student-run, with shows at BJ's being put on by student Jack Smoller and Foxhead Record Company, who puts on shows at Main Street Studios. Foxhead is led by 3 Fredonia students, Liam Powers, Jake King, and Felix Kellogg Williams.
Plenty of bands play at these venues, and one such band is Beach Tower, which was formed in 2019, just a few months before the pandemic.
Casio Fonseca is the lead vocalist of Beach Tower. As an incoming student, Fonseca had the opportunity to participate in a scene that wasn't affected by COVID. Our friend Heather Aquino spoke to Fonseca about his experience.
What was college life like before the pandemic?
Oh, man. Coming into Fredonia, fall of 2019 was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
It was a lot of, like, really new things, and I was very nervous.
Mm-hmm.
But I think really trying to push myself into the music scene early on really helped because I was able to meet a lot of really cool people and make a lot of connections, which have, like, kind of kept going to now. I felt it was easier in some ways. I don't know. I feel like things were going really well up until, like, March of 2020. as probably was with a lot of people. But yeah, it was a pretty good time. I enjoyed it.
However, when COVID-19 hit, Fonseca says the scene looked much different.
With COVID in 2020, everything just kind of stopped because there was a ton of on-campus bands, but a lot of them were like everyone was seniors. So when COVID happened and we all got sent home, all of those like really cool established bands just kind of left with it.
And then, once the pandemic started to ease up, Fonseca explained how things in the scene still weren't quite back to normal.
And we came back in fall of 2020, and there really wasn't much of anything going on. And, like, there wasn't really anything to do, so a lot of people weren't really making bands or doing music or anything. We couldn't have shows. So that was kind of like a really low point.
Then, as time went on, the desire to bring the scene back to what it once was grew stronger.
Yeah, fall 2021, spring 2022, around there was kind of when things started to pick up again. It was still like very small, very scattered shows, but there was definitely just a feeling that like people wanted music.
Today, several new artists have come into the scene. Sticking with tradition, bands from Buffalo, Rochester, and other places around the country stop here in Fredonia for a quick show. But the future of Fredonia's scene remains a mystery.
What do you hope to see from the scene in the future?
Yeah, I want it to continue to grow. I want it to continue to thrive. I want more performance spaces to open up. I know people are trying to do more like orthodox performance spaces, which is really cool. Yeah, I just hope it continues and we get more like diversity within it.
The music scene in Fredonia gets bigger every year with Battle of the New Bands. Battle of the New Bands is hosted by SUNY Fredonia's Music Industry Club and gives upcoming artists an opportunity to form a band, create original music, and audition for a spot in the Battle of the New Bands competition. If selected, the new bands will compete for the title of Best New Band.
This year, the title went to Amphobia, a pop-punk group. Chloe sat down with Sydney Finesilver, who is one of Amphobia's vocalists and plays keyboard and sometimes guitar. For a new band entering an already existing scene, Finesilver said the experience was unique.
So now you guys are a new band entering the local Fredonia scene that's kind of been going on for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
What is that like?
A little intimidating, but thankfully we have had a lot of support from everyone around us who's super excited to hear what we sound like. I was super nervous in the beginning because I was just very like, I never really performed like in a band setting like that, so I was like, oh my god, like what if I suck? But especially after Battle of the New Bands, it's very exciting, especially with all of the support coming from all angles.
Amphobia recently played the bar venue BJ's and drew in a large crowd. The audience was filled with cheers and applause throughout their performance. As a newly formed band, Finesilver said she and her bandmates have a lot to look forward to as they enter the scene.
I'm looking forward to all the new bands that are like forming and finding their sound. And also I'm looking forward to creating music and putting that stuff out there and sharing it with everybody.
For Amphobia, the future in the music scene is bright as they enter next semester with a Battle of the New Bands victory and a performance at one of Fredonia's most popular venues under their belt.
Genevieve, Genevieve, you're knocking me down, down, down to my knees. Genevieve, Genevieve, you're leaving me black and blue, forgive me, please.
While the bands and local music stores make up a pretty hefty section of the Western New York music scene, the shows would be nothing without the crowds who fill the venues with clapping and dancing.
Our friend Hunter Halterman sat down with a few students who frequent the local music scene. Heather Leonardi is a junior music industry major at SUNY Fredonia. She spends her evenings attending local concerts and shows at Main Street Studios and BJ's.
Could you like kind of describe some of these shows for me? Like paint me a picture, how it looks?
Yeah, so usually a lot of people, a lot of friends, a lot of other kids that are very into music here. Just kind of all vibing out to bands, whether you know the music or not. It's just fun to hang out with a bunch of people and listen to some music.
But Foxhead's shows aren't just popular with Leonardi. In fact, Brian Valencia, a sophomore audio radio production major, has attended almost every single show that's been held at Main Street Studios.
How would you describe the shows at Main Street?
They're very fun. All the people that come there are there to have a good time, and whether we're inside listening and jumping around or outside, catching a breather, it really feels like a good time where everyone really just feels the same way.
Right. Yeah.
The crowds attending shows in the scene are often diverse, featuring a variety of genders, races, and even ages. In fact, post-pandemic, many SUNY Fredonia freshmen are finding their way into the scene.
Hunter also sat down with Izzy and Zenna, a freshman double majoring in audio radio production and journalism. As a freshman, Inzenna has the unique experience of seeing the scene shortly after COVID and getting to watch it revive as she goes through college. Inzenna made her prediction of what the scene will look like in a few years.
Where do you think the scene is going in the future? Obviously, it's bouncing back from COVID right now.
I think that as the music scene continues, I feel like it's going to get a lot more popular with people being excited to be able to go back to concerts, since for so long I feel like these concerts weren't running. But now it's back and everyone's probably really hyped about it, so I feel like it's going to get a lot better, get a lot more hype. I feel like it's going to be a lot of new bands popping up and a lot of new music, and we're probably going to see some new styles as well.
Oftentimes, those in the crowd double as performers. Ryan Terry is a fourth-year music composition major at Fredonia. He's also a co-frontman for the local band Violent Graffiti and is the lead guitarist for Beach Tower. Terry is one of the few students left at Fredonia who had been a part of the music scene prior to COVID-19.
Could you paint a picture for me real quick how the music scene looked pre-COVID?
Yeah, so there were a lot more venues than I think when COVID came back, it was just North Pole. But prior to that, there was North Pole, there was Creek House, there were BJ shows, there were a lot of shows going on campus. I know even before me, there was a venue called the Lighthouse. And the scene was pretty heavily dominated by pop rock and even like harder styles like hardcore and alt metal and whatnot. That was sort of the predominant bands in the scene.
Clearly, the scene used to look a lot different. In fact, Terry said that the scene was mostly controlled by Music Industry Club at SUNY Fredonia. Once COVID-19 did hit, Terry said there were a lot of unknowns.
There was this sort of instant like, oh, well, this isn't going to be as bad as we think it's going to be. We're going to keep trying to play shows. We're going to keep trying to be active. A lot of bands started doing that. For Beach Tower, we ended up recording the EP during COVID. Like I drove from Buffalo, and then cousin Evan drove from Liberty to finish the EP, and we did that in like 2 or 3 days. So I don't think anyone realized how bad it was going to get. And then as it was going on, people were trying to find more creative ways to get their music out there. Music Industry Club did live streams. We played on one of those. We did our own EP release live stream, a lot of singles. And then as COVID went on, it was a lot of people recording from home.
But as the United States slowly moved out of the pandemic phase, so did the Fredonia music scene. And with that transition came changes to the scene many knew before.
It was revived pretty quickly, but instead of it being centered around sort of pop rock, guitar, bass, drums, the scene got a lot weirder. And there were a lot more, there were more electronic bands. There were more, genre fluid bands. I think it looks a lot different.
As someone who's been in the local music scene for quite some time, Terry had a few things he wishes to see in the future.
I think it's going to get more diverse. I think there's going to be more women involved. I think there's going to be more people of color involved. Those are the parts that really excite me. And I think every time one venue stops, another venue starts. Like anytime, like when North Pole disappeared and Main Street started back up, So I think if there are people who want to listen to or make music, there will be ways that they do it, and there will be an audience for it.
Cook, who we mentioned earlier, has a lot of history within the Fredonia music scene. As a freshman, she would visit many of the old venues that don't exist anymore. Cook fell in love with the scene and wanted to become a part of it herself.
Like, I was kind of writing songs, but they were pretty good, but, like, I didn't want to tell anyone about them. And Miles and a couple other people were, like, the only people, and they were like, you should release that, and I just wouldn't. That's what I was 5 years ago, and this is where I am now, and I'm like, that girl needs a band and someone to back her up and write with her, because that's all I needed, and then it was like, anything's possible after that.
Last year, Cook formed her own band, Hallam Pals. She, along with her fellow students, have played at BJ's, at school-affiliated events, and even in Buffalo. Cook went from being a freshman exploring the scene and writing music to being in one of the most popular bands in Fredonia.
And I remember we just invited Jake out of nowhere to come and play with us, and he just, like, showed up, and we just kind of played some Dead songs, and then I showed him some new songs, and he showed me some new songs, and he's like, we could do this. Like, we could do, like, you want to come back to Fred, and we could do something, and we can write together, we could... So I feel like that, like, and everybody else just came with Jake. He just leads the parade, but but they all were equally as interested.
Right.
But I think that wouldn't have happened because there was that whole period where everyone was just, like, bored, and they were just like, call me up anytime, and I'll wear a mask, like, just whatever.
Just want to play music.
I just want to do something. So, yeah, they would just, like, one by one, we would have another person come and play.
Cook's story is one that is ingrained in Fredonia's scene. The ability to go from an avid fan to actively performing music. Between Cook, Terry, Fonseca, Fine Silver, and many more, all of them took this path. It has not been the first time, nor will it be the last.
While COVID changed the sound of the music scene here at Fredonia, it couldn't change the heart of it.
The scene came out stronger and more collaborative than before. We saw the efforts to preserve the community connection with local record stores, the adaptation of sound and genre with both new and old bands, and the eyewitness account of the scene from community members.
The scene itself has kept its welcoming nature. Anyone willing to perform in this small town is met with support, whether they are local or not. Fredonia loves its music, and a pandemic will never change that.
Now, the scene stands in a place where we have a lot that's unknown, but a lot to look forward to.
As we approach the end of the year, let our podcast serve as a timestamp in Fredonia's local music scene history.
This is what the scene looks like on the eve of 2023.
So call me a martyr and hang me out to dry. Hit me harder, come on, spit in my eye. Let me be the effigy that you worship at its feet after you beg and you plead for some holy blasphemy.
The music used in this podcast is a conglomerate of local bands such as Saint Blind, Second Suitor, Asteroid Day, Chemi, Amphobia, P.S. You're Dead, and Garden Closet.
The recording of this podcast was made possible through SUNY Fredonia's Communications Department under the advice of Dr. Christopher Dahlie, as well as Fredonia Radio Systems.
Our scriptwriters are Alex Irwin, Hunter Halterman, and Chloe Kowalik. Our editors were Alex Irwin and Hunter Halterman. Our reporters were Hunter Halterman and Heather Aquino. Our hosts were Alex Irwin and Chloe Kowalik.
Special thank yous are extended to both Sound Services and Foxhead Record Company for allowing us to record at their shows.
And thank you to all individuals who agreed to be interviewed for this podcast. From store owners to bands to fans, this podcast would not have been possible without their cooperation. We have been your hosts. My name is Alex Irwin.
And I'm Chloe Kowalik. We hope you have enjoyed this look into the Fredonia music scene, and may it continue for years to come.